Welcome back to part two of Frogs and Toads of Williamsburg. Let's go ahead and get started. Our first toad is the American toad. And like all true toads, this is a toad that has dry, warty skin. This is our largest toad, and it's large. It can get up to 4 inches in size. And you're going to notice, just like all true toads, it has these warts on its back, and it has these parotoid glands, and you can see it has a cranial ridge. And so those are going to be the diagnostic features that help you distinguish this toad from other toads. You can see with the little diagram up there that the cranial ridge and the parotoid gland do not touch one another. There are also other things that you can use to tell this toad from Fowler's toad. One is that if you turned it over and looked at its belly, you would see that it has black spots on its belly, as you can see there on the side. Another thing that you could tell is if you looked at one and you could actually see that it had spots on it, you would notice it only has about one wart per spot. The song of this one can really be something that you never forget. It's a trill that just goes on forever and ever. Okay, our next toad is the Fowler's toad, which is slightly smaller than the American toad, but it's still a large toad. Now, you can see with this one that the cranial ridge, which is right here, is actually right up against the parotoid gland. The other thing that you can use to distinguish this one is you'll see that this one, which you can clearly see the spots, it has 3 or more warts per spot. And one other diagnostic feature is that it has on every single one of these a stripe that runs down the middle of its back. Now, when you hear this one call, it's going to sound an awful lot like a baby crying. On to the true frogs. Okay, so with true frogs, we're going to be using a combination of spots and dorsal lateral ridges to be able to distinguish the different species. So our first one is a southern leopard frog. It's a large frog. It's called a leopard frog because you can notice that it has these spots scattered around on its body, and the spots are roundish. And then it has this really distinct dorsolateral ridge that runs all the way down it from behind its eye to its pelvis region. But it's a very sharp ridge. Now, when you hear this frog call, it almost sounds like it's a chuckle, like it's laughing about something. Next is the pickerel frog. The pickerel frog also has spots on it, but you'll notice those spots, first of all, tend to be more squarish, and they seem to line up in these parallel lines along its back and along its sides. So that will really help you distinguish this frog from the leopard frog. Uh, Also, you'll notice the dorsolateral ridge, while it's there, is not as distinct. It's more rounded and softer looking than it is on the leopard frog. And then last, there's a little bit of yellow that you see down in the pelvic region underneath on the pickerel frog. Now this frog, when you hear this frog call, it's going to sound, oh, it sounds an awful lot to me like somebody snoring, like the worst snoring you've ever heard, like your uncle has fallen asleep at Thanksgiving on the couch and is snoring to beat the band. Next is the green frog, which is another large frog. Uh, you notice first of all with this one that the spots are not nearly as distinctive as they were on the leopard frog or the pickerel frog. So that should help you a little bit. It is going to be typically a brownish to a light green color. And what you're going to notice is when you look at this dorsolateral ridge, it runs down and then it sort of stops before it gets to his pelvis region. Uh, the other thing you're going to notice is the tympanic membrane or the tympanum, the eardrum, is going to be really, really large compared to the other frogs. So this is a very familiar sounding frog. If you fish a lot in the summertime, you will recognize this sound. It sounds like somebody's playing a rubber band banjo that they made, if you remember making those when you were in either preschool or elementary school. So here's a green frog calling. Our last true frog is our largest, the bullfrog. And this frog is extra large, or like I like to say, supersized. It's 8 inches in size. And this is the frog. If you ever eat frog legs, you may have eaten the legs of one of these creatures. They're just huge. And they're eating machines. They'll eat fish, they'll eat other frogs, they'll even eat baby ducks. Anything that they can stick in their mouth, they will eat. They tend to be a green to dark green to almost a brownish black color sometimes. But their size will be, first of all, will be a giveaway as to what you're looking at. But the other thing will be the dorsolateral ridge, which you'll notice starts at the eye like they all do, but this time, instead of running all the way down, it's going to run around the tympanic membrane or the tympanum. And so that's going to be the feature that's going to really, really help you identify this frog, this huge frog. Now, when you hear the sound of this one, some books say that it sounds like it's going jug-a-rum, jug-a-rum, jug-a-rum. And it does sort of sound like that when you listen to them once they get going. But a couple years ago, someone said, Mr. Beard, this thing sounds like it's a lightsaber from Star Wars and that you're having a lightsaber fight. And you know what? That's exactly what it sounds like, a lightsaber. So listen. Doesn't that sound like a lightsaber? All right. Now to two frogs that don't really fit in any of those three groups. And the very first one is a small frog called an eastern narrowmouth toad, which you seldom see around here because it likes to bury itself into vegetation and leaf litter and mud. But it's out there, and I've actually seen a couple of them before. So I, when I first described this toad, I to me it looked like, frankly, it looked like a little turd, and that's exactly what I ended up calling it, the eastern narrowmouth turd toad. But we can't really call it here a turd toad. We'll just call it the narrowmouth toad. But it's called narrowmouth because you can see it's got that pointy head. And another distinguishing feature of this particular toad is that you'll see it has this fold of skin right here behind its eyes. Nothing else that we have around here has that. So it's a very distinctive, very small toad that's about the color of brown or black or like a turd. So what does it sound like? Well, it sounds like sheep. It sounds like the baaing of sheep. So listen to this. It's very distinctive. Our last uh, toad that doesn't fit into any group is the eastern spadefoot toad. And this toad is a medium-sized toad, and it can be gray, olive red, and covered with light-colored patches, brown, like this one here. So how are you going to tell this particular one? Well, first of all, just the size of the eyes compared to the rest of the body, that's pretty much a dead giveaway. Also, on the back are these lines that run down its back, and those lines form an hourglass shape. And then if you happen to pick one up and hold it in your hand, you'll notice that it has this spade on the hind foot. And that's what allows this particular frog to do what it does best, which is burrow into the ground. And that's why we don't see this frog around here very much, even though they're probably around, because it is a burrower and spends much of its time underground and will only come out when it's time to breed. Now, how are you going to tell this uh, frog sound from all the others? Well, I used to think it sounded like a bunch of sighing students when I tell bad jokes in class, and they'll go, But now that I've listened to it over the years, I really think it sounds like a whoopee cushion. You know, those things you stick underneath people when they sit down, and they sit on it and they make a farting noise. So see what you think. And so ends our journey through the 14 frogs of Williamsburg that you need to learn. I hope you'll get outside and listen for these. If you don't see them, at least listen for them in the springtime. The spring peepers will start singing sometime. They might even do it in January if the weather's warm enough. It doesn't have to be that warm for them. In March, you'll start hearing American toads and southern leopard frogs, and it just goes from there. So get outside and hear them and enjoy them because they're just fascinating creatures.